Our Lady of the Flowers by Genet, page 118. The friend of the family is the giddiest thing I know in the neighborhood. Mimosa too, Mimosa the Great. The one is now being kept by an old man. She has her villa in St. Cloud. As she was in love with Mimosa too, who was then a milkman, she left her name. The two isn't pretty, but what can be done about it? Divine has invited her to high tea. She came to the garret at about 5 o'clock. They kissed each other on the cheek, being very careful to make sure their bodies did not touch. She greeted Darling with a male handshake, and there she is, sitting on the couch where Divine sleeps. Darling was preparing the ladies' tea. He had his little coquetries. "It's nice of you to come, Mimo. We see you so seldom." "That's the least I could do, my dear. Besides, I simply adore your little nook. It has quite a vicarage effect with the park in the distance. It must be awfully nice having the dead for neighbors." Indeed, the window was very lovely. When the cemetery was beneath the moon at night from her bed, Divine could see it bright and deep in the moonlight. The light was such that one could clearly discern beneath the grass of the graves, and beneath the marble, the spectral unrest of the dead. Thus, the cemetery, through the fringed window, was like a limpid eye between two wide-open lids, or better still, it was like a blue glass eye, those eyes of the fair-haired blind, in the hollow of a Negro's palm. It would dance, that is. The wind stirred the grass and the cypresses. It would dance, that is. It was melodic, and its body moved like a jellyfish. Divine's relations with the cemetery. It had worked its way into her soul, somehow, somewhat, as certain sentences work their way into a text. That is, a letter here, a letter there. The cemetery within her was present at cafes, on the boulevard, in jail, under the blankets, in the pissoirs, or, if you prefer, the cemetery was present within her somewhat as that gentle, faithful, submissive dog was present in Darling, occasionally giving the pimp's face the sad, stupid look that dogs have. Mimosa is leaning out the window, the bay window of the departed, and is looking for a grave with her finger pointing. When she found it, she yelps, "Ah, you hussy, you harlot, you finally kicked off. So now you're good and stiff beneath the icy marble, and I'm walking on your rugs, you bitch." "You're wackaroo," muttered Darling, who almost bawled her out in horror, a secret language. "Darling, I may be wacky with love for you, you great big terrible darling, but Charlotte's down there in the grave. Charlotte's right down there." We laughed, for we knew that Charlotte was her grandfather, who was down in the cemetery, with a grant in perpetuity. "And how's Louise?" That was Mimosa's father. "And Lucy?" Her mother, asked Divine. "Ah, Divine, don't talk to me about them. They're much too well. The dumb bitches will never kick off. They'll just a couple of filthy sluts." Darling liked what the faggots talked about. He especially liked, provided it was done in private, the way they talked. While preparing the tea, he listened with a gliding caravel on his lips. Darling's smile was never stagnant. It seemed forever twitching with a touch of anxiety. Today, he is more anxious than usual. For tonight, he is to leave Divine. In view of what is going to happen, Mimosa seems to him terrible, wolf-like. Divine has no idea of what is in store. She will learn all at once of her desertion and of Mimosa's shabby behavior, for they have managed the affair without losing any time. Roger, Mimosa's man, has taken a powder. My Roger's off to the wars. She's gone to play Amazon. Mimosa said that one day, in front of Darling, who offered in jest to replace Roger. Well, she accepted. Our domestic life and the law of our homes do not resemble your homes. We love each other without love. Our homes do not have the sacramental character. Fags are the great immoralists. In the twinkling of an eye, after 6 years of union, without considering himself attached, without thinking that he was causing pain or doing wrong, Darling decided to leave Divine. Without remorse, only a slight concern that perhaps Divine might refuse ever to see him again. As for Mimosa, the fact of hurting a rival is enough to make her happy about the pain she is causing. The two queens were chirping away. Their talk was dull compared to the play of their eyes. The eyelids did not flutter, nor did the temples crinkle. Their eyeballs flowed from right to left, left to right, rotated, and their glances were manipulated by a system of ball bearings. Let us listen now as they whisper, so that Darling may draw near, and standing beside them, pachyderm that he is, make titanic efforts to understand. Mimosa whispers, "My dear, it's when the cuties still have their pants on that I like them. You just look at them, and they get all stiff. It drives you mad, simply mad. It starts a crease that goes on and on and on, all the way down to their feet. When you touch it, you keep following the crease without pressing on it right to the toes. For that, I recommend sailors especially." Darling was smiling faintly. He knows. The big beaut of a man does not excite him, but he is no longer surprised that it excites Divine and Mimosa. Mimosa says to Darling, "You're playing hostess to get away from us." He answers, "I'm making the tea." As if realizing that his answer was too noncommittal, he added, "No news from Roger boy?" "No," said Mimosa. "I'm the quite alone." She also meant I'm the quite persecuted. When they had to express a feeling that risked involving an exuberance of gesture or voice, the queens contented themselves with saying, "I'm the quite," in a confidential tone, almost a murmur, heightened by a slight movement of their ringed hand, which calms an invisible storm. Old-timers who in the days of the great Mimosa had known the wild cries of freedom and the mad gestures of boldness brought on by feelings swollen with desires that contorted the mouth, made the eyes glow and bared the teeth, wondered what mysterious mildness had now replaced the disheveled passions. Once Divine began her litany, she kept on until she was exhausted. The first time Darling heard it, he merely looked at her in bewilderment. It was in the room. He was amused. But when Divine began again in the street, he said, "Shut up, chick. You're not going to make me look like an ass in front of the boys." His voice was so cold, so ready to give her the works, that Divine recognized her master's voice. She restrained herself. But you know that nothing is so dangerous as repression. One evening at a pimp's bar on the Place Clichy, where out of prudence Darling usually went without her, Divine paid for the drinks and, in picking up the change, forgot to leave a tip on the counter for the waiter. When she realized it, she let out a shriek that rent the mirrors and the lights. A shriek that stripped the pins. "My God! I'm the quite giddy." Right and left, with the merciless speed of misfortune, 2 slaps shut her up, shrank her like a greyhound, her head no longer even as high as the bar. Darling was in a rage. He was green beneath the neon. "Beat it," he said. He, however, went on sipping his cognac to the last drop. These cries, Darling will say, "She's losing her yipes," as if he were thinking, "You're losing money," or "You're putting on weight," were one of the idiosyncrasies of Mimosa, one that Divine had appropriated. When they and a few others were together in the street or a queer cafe, from their conversations, from their mouths and hands, would escape ripples of flowers, in the midst of which they simply stood or sat about as casually as could be, discussing ordinary household matters. "I really am sure, the quite profligate." "Oh, ladies, I'm acting like such a harlot." "You know." The "ooh" was so drawn out that was all one noticed. "You know I'm the consumed with affliction." "Here, here, behold the quite fluff." One of them, when questioned by a detective on the boulevard, "Who are you?" "I'm a thrilling thing." Then, little by little, they understood each other by saying, "I'm the quite. And finally, "I'm the QQ." It was the same for the gestures. Divine had a very great one. When she took her handkerchief from her pocket, it described an enormous arc before she put it to her lips. Anyone trying to read something into Divine's gesture would have been infallibly mistaken, for two gestures were here contained in one. There was the elaborated gesture, which was diverted from its initial goal, and the one that contained and completed it by grafting itself on just at the point where the first ceased. Thus, in taking her hand out of her pocket, Divine had meant to extend her arm and shake her unfurled lace handkerchief, to shake it for a farewell to nothing, to let fall a powder which it did not contain. A perfume. No, it was a pretext. This tremendous gesture was needed to relate the following oppressive drama. "I am alone. Save me who can." But Darling, though unable to destroy it completely, had reduced the gesture which, without, however, becoming trivial, had turned into something hybrid and thereby strange. He had, in overwhelming it, made it overwhelming. Speaking of these constraints, Mimosa had said, "Our males have turned us into a garden of rheumatics." When Mimosa left the garret, Darling tried to pick a quarrel with Divine, so he could leave her. He found nothing to quarrel about. That made him furious with her. He called her a bitch and left. So Divine is alone in the world. Whom shall I give her for a lover? The gypsy I am seeking? The one whose figure, because of the high heels of his Marseille pumps, resembles a guitar? About his legs there, coil and climb, the better to hug him coldly at the buttocks, the trousers of a sailor. Divine is alone, with me. The whole world that stands guard around the Santé prison knows nothing, has no desire to know anything, of the distress of a little cell lost amidst others, which are all so much alike that I, who know it well, often mistake it. Time leaves me no respite. I feel it passing. What shall I do with Divine? If Darling comes back, it will not be long before he leaves again. He has tasted divorce, but Divine needs a few jolts which squeeze her, pull her apart, paste her back together, shatter her, till all I have left of her is a bit of essence which I am trying to track down. That is why M. Roquelaure, 127, Rue du Douai, an employee of the Municipal Transport Company, when he went down at 7 a.m. to get the milk and the morning paper for himself and Madame Roquelaure, who was combing out her hair in the kitchen, found in the narrow hallway of the house on the floor a trampled fan. The plastic handle was encrusted with fake emeralds. He kicked at the rubbish boyishly and kept shoving it out onto the sidewalk and then into the gutter. It was Divine's van. That very evening, Divine had met Darling quite by chance and had gone with him, without reproaching him for his flight. He listened to her, whistling as he did, perhaps a bit contrite. They happened to run into Mimosa. Divine bent to the ground in a deep bow, but Mimosa, in a voice that sounded male to Divine for the first time, screamed, "Get the hell out of here, you dirty whore, you dirty cocksucker!" It was the milkman. This is not an unfamiliar phenomenon, the case of the second nature that can no longer resist and allows the first to break out in blind hatred. We wouldn't mention it were it not a matter of showing the duplicity of the sex of fags. We shall not see the same thing happen again in the case of Divine. So it was quite serious. Here again, Darling with magnificent cowardice. I maintain that cowardice is an active quality which, once it assumes this intensity, spreads like a white dawn, a phantasm, about handsome young cowards who move within it in the depths of a sea. Did not deign to take sides. His hands were in his pockets. "Go on, kill each other," he said with a sneer. The sneer, which still rings in my ears, was uttered one evening in my presence by a 16-year-old child. This should give you an idea of what Satanism is. Divine and Mimosa fought it out. Leaning against the wall of a house, Divine gave little kicks and beat down on the air with her fists. Mimosa was the stronger and hit hard. Divine managed to break away and run, but Mimosa caught her just as she reached the half-open door of a house. The struggle continued in the hallway with hushed voices and pulled punches. The tenants were asleep. The concierge heard nothing. Divine thought, the concierge can't hear anything because her name is Madame Mueller. The street was empty. Darling, standing on the sidewalk with his hands still in his pockets, was gazing thoughtfully at the garbage in the can that had been put outside. Finally, he made up his mind and left. They're both friggin' idiots. On the way, he thought, if Divine's got a shiner, I'll spit in her dirty mug. Boy, fags are rough. But he came back to live with Divine. So Divine found her pimp again, and her friend Mimosa, and resumed her life in the garret, which was to last another 5 years. The garret overlooking the dead, Montmartre by night. The shame on me crazy. We're approaching 30, with my head still under the covers, my fingers digging into my eyes, and my mind off somewhere. There remains only the lower part of my body detached by my digging fingers from my rotting head. A guard who goes by, the chaplain who comes in and doesn't talk of God. I no more see them than I know that I'm in the Santé prison, poor Santé, which goes to the trouble of keeping me. Darling loves Divine more and more deeply, that is, more and more without realizing it. Word by word, he grows attached, but more and more neglects her. She stays in the garret alone. She offers up to God her love and sorrow. For God, as the Jesuits have said, chooses a myriad of ways to enter into souls. The golden powder, a swan, a bull, a dove, and countless others. For a gigolo who cruises the tea rooms, perhaps he has a way that theology has not catalogued. Perhaps he chooses to be a tea room. We might also wonder, had churches not existed, what form the sanctity, I'm not saying her path to salvation, of Divine and of all the other saints would have taken? We must realize that Divine does not live with the gladness of heart. She accepts, unable to elude it, the life that God makes for her and that leads her to Him. But God is not gilt-edged. Before his mystic throne, useless to adopt artful poses, pleasing to the Greek eye, divine is consumed with fire. I might, just as she admitted to me, confide that if I take contempt with a smile or a burst of laughter, it is not yet, and will it be some day, out of contempt for contempt, but rather in order not to be ridiculous, not to be reviled by anything or anyone that I have placed myself lower than dirt. I could not do otherwise. If I declare that I am an old whore, no one can better that. I discourage insult. People can't even spit in my face anymore, and darling Daintyfoot is like the rest of you. All he can do is despise me. I've spent whole nights at the following game, working up sobs, bringing them to my eyes, and leaving them there without their bursting, so that in the morning my eyelids ache. They feel hard and stony, as painful as a sunburn. The sob at my eyes might have flowed into tears, but it remains there, weighing against my eyelids like a condemned man against the door of a cell. It is especially then that I realize how deeply I suffer. Then it's the turn for another sob to be born, then another. I swallow them all and spit them out in wisecracks. So my smile, which others may call my whistling in the dark, is merely the inordinate need to activate a muscle in order to release an emotion. We are, after all, familiar enough with the tragedy of a certain feeling which is obliged to borrow its expression from the opposite feeling so as to escape from the myrmidons of the law. It disguises itself in the trappings of its rival. To be sure, a great earthly love would destroy this wretchedness, but darling is not yet the chosen one. Later on, there will come a soldier, so that divine may have some respite in the course of that calamity which is her life. Darling is merely a fraud, an adorable fraud, divine calls him, and he must remain one in order to preserve my tale. It is only on this condition that I can like him. I say of him as of all my lovers, against whom I butt and crumble. Let him be steeped in indifference. Let him be petrified with blind indifference. Divine will take up this phrase and apply it to Our Lady of the Flowers. This movement makes Divine laugh with grief. Gabriel himself will tell us how an officer who loved him, unable to do better, used to punish him. Our Lady of the Flowers here makes his solemn entrance through the door of crime, a secret door that opens onto a dark but elegant stairway. Our Lady mounts the stairway as many a murderer, any murderer, has mounted it. He is 16 when he reaches the landing. He knocks at the door, then he waits. His heart is beating, for he is determined. He knows that his destiny is being fulfilled, and although he knows, Our Lady knows, or seems to know it better than anyone, that his destiny is being fulfilled at every moment, he has the pure mystic feeling that this murder is going to turn him, by virtue of the baptism of blood, into Our Lady of the Flowers. He is excited as he stands in front of, or behind, the door, as if, like a fiancé in white gloves. Behind the wood, a voice asks, "What is it?" "It's me," mutters the youngster. Confidently, the door opens and closes behind him. Killing is easy, since the heart is on the left side, just opposite the armed hand of the killer, and the neck fits so neatly into the two joined hands. The corpse of the old man one of those thousands of old men whose lot it is to die that way, is lying on the blue rug. Our Lady has killed him, a murderer. He doesn't say the word to himself, but rather I listen with him in his head to the ringing of the chimes that must be made up of all the bells of Lily of the Valley, the bells of spring flowers, bells made of porcelain, glass, water, air. His head is a singing copse. He himself is a beribboned wedding feast, skipping with the violin in front and orange blossoms on the back of the jackets down a sunken April road. He feels himself, youngster that he is, leaping from flowery veil to flowery veil, straight to the mattress, where the old man has tucked away his little pile. He turns it over, turns it back, rips it open, pulls out the wool, but he finds nothing. For nothing is so hard to find as money after a premeditated murder. "Where does the bastard keep his dough?" he says aloud. These words are not articulated, but, since they are only felt, are rather spat out of his throat in a tangled mass. It is a croak. He goes from one piece of furniture to the next. He loses his temper. His nails catch in the grooves. He rips fabrics. He tries to regain his composure, stops to catch his breath, and, in the silence, surrounded by objects that have lost all meaning now that their customary user has ceased to exist, he suddenly feels himself in a monstrous world, made up of the soul of the furniture, of the objects. He is seized with panic. He swells up like a bladder, grows enormous, able to swallow the world and himself with it, and then subsides. He wants to get away as slowly as he can. He is no longer thinking about the body of the murdered man, nor the lost money, nor the lost time, nor the lost act. The police are probably lurking somewhere. Got to beat it fast. His elbow strikes a vase standing on a commode. The vase falls down, and 20,000 francs scatter graciously at his feet. He opened the door without anxiety, went out on the landing, leaned over, and looked down the silent stairwell between the apartments at the glittering bowl of cut crystal. Then he walked down the nocturnal carpet and into the nocturnal air. Through the silence which is that of eternal space, step by step, into eternity. The street. Life is no longer unclean. With a feeling of lightness, he runs off to a small hotel which turns out to be a dive and rents a room. There, to assuage him, the true night, the night of the stars, comes little by little, and a touch of horror turns his stomach. It is that physical disgust of the first hour, of the murderer for the murdered, about which a number of men have spoken to me. It haunts you, doesn't it? The dead man is rigorous. Your dead man is inside you, mingled with your blood. He flows in your veins, oozes out through your pores, and your heart lives on him. As cemetery flowers sprout from corpses, he emerges from you through your eyes, your ears, your mouth. Our Lady of the Flowers would like to vomit out the carcass. The night which has come on does not bring terror. The room smells of horror, stinks and smells fragrant. To escape from horror as we have, bury yourself in it. All by itself, the murderer's hand seeks his penis, which is erect. He strokes it through the sheet, gently at first, with the lightness of a fluttering bird, then grips it, squeezes it hard. Finally, he discharges into the toothless mouth of the strangled old man. He falls asleep.